Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. I'm pretty sure you guys, if you follow this topic, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of Otzi the Iceman, the guy who was found in the early 90s by German tourists in the Alps. If you don't know, just a quick rundown of what happened. So in 1991, these German tourists, they were hiking in the Alps, and they found a body, a preserved, I think the most ancient and earliest example that's ever been found in the archaeological record of a natural mummified body that was found. So they found this. He was named Otzi because he was found in the Otzi Alps. He was very well preserved. Flesh was still on the bone, and the story goes that he was murdered, and his body ended up shortly after he was murdered. His body got preserved in the ice for over 5,000 years, 5,300 years to be precise. So they found his body in 1991, and from that point on, even to this day, they've been researching and studying him with a fine-tooth comb. They've been going through everything, and the stuff that they found this year is really, really interesting. So let's get into that. Just as a reference, here's a map, and this red area is where he was found, and it's basically between Italy and Austria in the Alps there. I mean, there's a lot going on back then. This was during the Copper Age, so yeah, he was found with the copper axe. But other than that, other than like widespread metallurgy, because people were smelting copper in China, in the Middle East, and even in the Americas during this time, that idea seemed to be universal. That idea of smelting metals and creating things out of them. So a lot of the scientists, it occurred to them that there are probably other ideas out there that not just copper that were widespread. From studying Otzi, there was a lot of stuff that was confirmed. Like it confirmed their suspicions, so to speak. Back to the article. So 5,300 years ago, they found him. He was in good shape. They found out his age. I think he was in his mid-40s, like 45. He was short. He was like 5'3", and the way he died, he was murdered. So he bled to death, and he also got his head bashed in too. He got his ass kicked basically, and then they, for some reason or another, they either discarded his body, or his body just ended up in this ice case basically for thousands and thousands of years until they found him. So one thing that came out semi were these tattoos that he had. So they found that Otzi had these tattoos that were made from charcoal and needles. On closer inspection, they saw that these tattoos were more than just decorative. He had 61 of them, and they were all on critical parts of the body in terms of acupuncture. So they're at like pressure point spots. If you know anything about acupuncture, there are these spots in your body, on the human body, that correspond to other things. So for example, there could be an acupressure point that regulates the stomach, or maybe the brain, or your lower back, or lower abdominal pain, whatever. So if you had pain, there was a corresponding point somewhere in the body that could address that. So the crazy thing about that is they didn't think acupuncture was a thing until about, like, some people say 100 BC, other people push it back a little bit more, like 1000 BC, and it was only in China. It wasn't anywhere else. It was like it was an Eastern thing. But remember, Otzi's in the Alps. That's really far from China. So this opens up a whole new line of inquiry and a whole new way of thinking about the time period Otzi was living, which is about 3,300 BC, 3,400 BC, around there. The other thing that Otzi had were all these herbs and medicines. He had like mushrooms that were supposed to help with like digestion or something. He had other herbs that were supposed to help with some sort of inflammation. So even again, they had all this. They seem to have this trove of medical knowledge back then, which on its own, it doesn't seem that crazy, but they must have had a society that had an advanced healthcare system, or at least had the wherewithal to even think about it and act on it and try to innovate within it. So that speaks to a pretty advanced civilization. It makes a lot of sense because a lot of work had to be done to get to that point. And the other thing, just as an aside, I don't know if you guys know about the Voynich manuscript. It's basically, in a nutshell, it seems to be some sort of tome full of illustrations and knowledge, and the illustrations feature a bunch of different plants and herbs. But it's written in a dead language. They don't know where the language comes from. Maybe it's so old that it makes the fact that Otzi has these herbs on him, it kind of sheds a new light on that manuscript. Maybe that language was in use, and maybe it was popular back then, or maybe it's a coded language just for a secret society that had all this knowledge of herbs and stuff. But anyway, that's an aside. That's just what it made me think about. I'm always thinking about the Voynich manuscript. It just blows my mind. So his tattoos, the lines and crosses all over his body, they thought that they were therapeutic benefits rather than just as decorative embellishments. And it was associated with acupuncture, and that his community knew of the practice 2,000 years before it was believed to have first emerged in Asia. Now, I kind of did some research on the history of acupuncture, and I brought up a bunch of different stuff. So, for example, this comes from Columbia College of Integrative Health Sciences, and they say acupuncture is very ancient, and it goes back over 8,000 years, and it's rooted in the Taoist tradition. It went hand in hand with meditation and energy flow and qi and all that stuff. But the earliest archaeological evidence that's actually documented traces it back only about 300 BC. Like I said before, some of the numbers they're all over the place, but most of them, the oldest, I think I would have to say is probably with Otzi, it's probably way older. They just didn't bother to write it down, and the stuff that was written down, out of everything, maybe only a few things survived, and the stuff that survived is what we ended up getting. But there might have been way more stuff written down about it. We just don't have it yet. In any case, these numbers should all be obliterated now just because of the Iceman. He's like the earliest living proof of acupuncture. I'm pretty sure that's... Some people want to dismiss that as speculation, but I don't think it's speculation. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the guy has tattoos on all these spots, and they all seem to correspond with traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So I think it's indicative of there was something going on back then, and it wasn't just decorative. It wasn't like a barbed wire tattoo that you have just, or a tramp stamp just to be cool. Otzi wasn't trying to be cool. He seemed to be a guy who was really ailing, and he was a sickly guy, and he was trying to get better. So, and he had joint wear and tear, like all the stuff that you would get now just from living into your mid-40s. And back then he probably wasn't sedentary. Actually, they know he wasn't sedentary. He was actually in pretty good shape, aside from all that wear and tear and stuff, and all having parasites and all that stuff that comes with living back. And he was seeking to address. Okay, so how did they map all of this inking? Well, they used multispectral imaging analysis, and they found initially they only thought he had 59 tattoos, but now with the new technology, they found out that there were 61, which makes even more sense. And here's a snippet of this article that really got me thinking. If Otzi's peers developed acupuncture, they must have undergone an extended regime of trial and error spurred by the desire and ability to develop medical practices. Yeah, that's exactly right. They had to have gone through trial and error, because otherwise how would they have found these points? Like they would have to literally go all throughout your body, every inch of your body, poke something, and then wait and see what happens, and then write it down, and then take it out, put it in again. Like, it would have been exhausting, and they would have had to do it on more than one person. They would have had to have a bunch of different people, and it just seems I think it would even be a stretch to say that Otzi's peers developed it. They probably just inherited it, and it was probably around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before that. I would say. I mean, the Taoists in China say it goes back 8,000 plus years. So, and yoga is the same thing. I don't know. I don't think when people say that, oh, it's impossible, it's too old. It's not within the realm of possibility that it could go back that far. It wouldn't survive. I think that's nonsense, because there are a lot of examples of things that go back way back in the day, even pre-Ice Age, that survived till now. And I'm talking about like cultural practices and stuff like that. Like farming's cultivation is a good example of that. So yeah, the main takeaway here is that there was an inquisitive, complex society going on back then. And it wasn't just limited to metallurgy and copper smelting and stuff like that. It was actually beyond that. And it would make total sense. If they were an advanced civilization, then it makes total sense that they had some medical line of inquiry. They had some sort of antibiotic herbs that they would find. I mean, they're not just living off the land and just smelting copper all day. I mean, we're talking about a multifaceted, multidimensional, large-scale society. So the authors conclude in their study, the picture of an orderly, skilled, and strategic form of operation puts provision of care into perspective. I love this Otzi saga. From day one since they found him. I remember when I was in grade school, and we read a magazine talking about this guy in class. So there's so much information just from this one guy that you could teach a generation of children about real history, about what really happened. Not just some revisionist BS thing. And also, it's a gift that keeps on giving. I mean, there's more and more stuff coming out. There's a website. Let me pull it up right now. There's a website dedicated to the Iceman, and it's like a year by year analysis of what's coming out, like even month by month. There's like let me just pull it up right now. What am I talking about? Well, I'll find that link and I'll put it in. I won't put it in now, but here's another photograph of these researchers, and they're examining what was in his stomach. And he was eating a high-protein diet. They reconstructed the Iceman's last meal, showing that he has had a remarkably high proportion of fat in his diet, supplemented with wild meat from ibex and red deer, cereals from einkorn with traces of toxic bracken, which is a large fern. So he was experimenting. He was taking something. He was eating high-fat, high-protein diet. So right away, he's like, he's eating a fad diet, right? Like the low-carb diet. And then he had a supposedly toxic genus of large ferns that probably for medicinal purposes he was eating it. So again, this is an example of stuff that just keeps coming out. More and more stuff about him keeps coming out. They even sequenced his DNA, and they found out that he comes from an extinct line of people. So, or his patrilineal line anyway, comes from an extinct lineage of people. So who knows what else is going on with this guy. But let me know, what do you guys know about Otzi? Have you guys heard about this story? Have you heard anything about Otzi at all? Do you guys remember reading about this in grade school? Perhaps for my older view, remember when this broke out in 91? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.